Thank you very much for still being there with us. Let's welcome Kabiru, Adamu, and Colonel Tony Nyiam. Welcome, gentlemen, to the program.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Utibe. Good morning.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Good morning. Yes. Let me start with you, Kabiru. I mean, when the news filtered in, I was, of course, admitted to by the Chief of Defense Staff, General Leo Irabo, that Bandit shot down a fighter jet. How surprised were you to hear such a story?
Frankly, not surprised at all, for the simple reason that a couple of months ago, the Defense Headquarters released a report indicating that they are aware that the bandits were in possession of military-grade weapons. And in those weapons that they mentioned in that report, they indicated that they had some RPGs and possibly other weapons that could bring down aircrafts. So clearly, the bandits, at least according to that report by the Defense Headquarters, were in possession of weapons that could threaten the Nigerian Air Force and its assets. So I honestly wasn't surprised when the report was published.
But still looking at the issue of, the recent crash that we have experienced in the Nigerian, Air Force lately, and a lot of people would worry that the tragic incidents keep occurring and in same style, recording the fact that we are already in the recent times looking at acquiring over 12 Super Tuscana fighter jets. But in the past 6 months, we've seen crashes here and there. What do you think could be the cause of this? Is there more to this than meets the eye?
So can you please clarify your question more to the fact that the crashes are occurring, or the fact that the bandits are in possession of these military-grade weapons?
No, the crashes that are occurring, doesn't that defeat the energy behind the fight against terrorism? I mean, you're seeing seasoned crashes, and over the time, people are beginning to lose faith. And even though we're looking at the dire situation of banditry, again, you're looking at the issue of the fight against it. Do you think that the crashes encourage, Nigerians believe in the fight against, banditry or terrorism?
So one of the unfortunate factors in the current circumstances in Nigeria is the fact that the reports for the crashes are not being released. So one is unclear what led to the crashes. However, if we do a postulation, there are a couple of factors that could be responsible for those crashes. One of them is human factor. The other one is the mechanical faults that could have occurred from the aircraft. And then you could have, issues around the weather. And then unfortunately, the one that I think is the topic of our discussion is the action of the enemy, where these planes are being shot down. And one of the most recent examples of that is what happened in Borno State a couple of months ago. I think early this year, around February or March, if I remember well, when one of our fighter jets was probably shot down by the terrorists in Borno State. And till date, I doubt if those pilots have been recovered. We've not been informed if the plane itself, that asset, has been recovered, or what exactly happened. Was it shot down by this terrorist? What kind of weapons did they use in shooting it down? So in the absence of the reports from this type of crashes, at the end of the day, two things have happened. Number one, there is a fear in the minds of especially those of us who are studying and following these developments, that we're dealing with an enemy that is in possession of weapons that is challenging the superiority of the Nigerian military. All sovereign countries have one similar element to their claim, that is the monopoly and the superiority that they have of the airspace. And where you have non-state actors challenging that superiority, then unfortunately it tells doom really to the efficacy of the Nigerian military. Then on the part of the populace, where you have that superiority being successfully challenged, it puts a lot of doubts in the minds of Nigerians about our ability to wage that campaign and, more importantly, to win it.
All right, Colonel Nyiam, let's talk about the capacity of these persons that Nigerians all over the place have now been calling bandits for some time now. They've been, for now, been able to shoot down a fighter aircraft. Something that the Boko Haram tried to lay claims to, but couldn't provide any logical evidence to show that they actually were the ones that did it when it happened some 2 months ago. Now, these guys, these so-called bandits, have been able to do this thing. The governor of Kaduna State, for instance, refers to them as just commercial criminals. And for many people, that's kind of undermining the capacity of what these people are capable of. Now that they've shown what their capacity is, do you think there's a need to re-evaluate how the Nigerian government approaches the issue of so-called bandits?
Thank you very much. Let me begin with a commendation. At least the good news is that one, first of all, to commend the flight lieutenant, Abarami Dairo, for his evasion and escape after parachuting drop. It was quite a feat. Secondly, to commend the Chief of Air Staff for his hands-on approach to the search and rescue mission. In addition, to commend the Chief of Defense Staff, who also coordinated, that is, using the military. For the first time, we see a coordination between the Air Force and the military to rescue the flight officer. Thirdly, let me commend the people, the emir, and the people of Dansado in Zamfara for their courage and ability to cooperate. By the way, the people of Dansado have people who have been for some time being killed by AK-47 armed headsmen. So I commend them for coming to the rescue. All it indicates is that the evidence is that the members of the armed forces and the people of Nigeria are not to blame for our insecurity. Rather, they are praiseworthy. On the question you've asked, first of all, I think there is something misleading in the announcement that came from the Air Force that gives the impression that the Alpha Jets was shot down. That impression is what must have given reason to my colleague thinking that it was the capacity of the bandits was what brought the aircraft down. I will slightly differ because on consultation, I find it difficult because the Alpha Jets flight range is such that no RPG can get there. I think what has happened is that the pilots must have been carrying out what is called dive bombing technique, or he must have flown low to try and confirm his target so that he doesn't bomb civilians. Either of these things, it was during the course of that coming down that they must have come under intensive ground fire. I suspect the fire they came under is basically, it is at that level that RPGs or small arms can affect an aircraft. Having said so, I commend the officer, Flight Lieutenant Abarami Dairo, for his evasion and escape. It shows the courage and is commendable.
Mr. Nyiam, that doesn't really fit in exactly to what the Air Force says. The statements by the Air Force spokesman clearly indicate that this aircraft, this fighter jet, was targeted by the enemies and shot down by the enemies. We really didn't provide the details on how low or how high this was flying, or how many kilometers or feet off the ground this was flying. But my question to you is the capacity of what the people we know as bandits to shoot down an aircraft. I mean, however low it is, you need some level of surface to air capacity to shoot down an aircraft such as an Alpha jet, isn't it?
No, my point is that I find it questionable. I find it questionable that the bandits have the capacity to shoot down an aircraft like Alpha jets if it's flying at the height it flies. You need a surface to air missile to be able to. So I think what I'm trying to say is that the announcement by the Air Force is slightly misleading, and it's more likely that the pilot was doing a dive bombing. In other words, he had to fly low to try and identify his target. And also, the aircraft being used is an old aircraft which has many inadequacies, like lacking laser guides, So I do not think that the bandits have the capability to shoot an Alpha jet if it's flying up in the sky.
Colonel Nyiam, you may not have you may doubt the capacity of these persons to do this, because maybe all along Nigerians have been seeing them as mere bandits.
Absolutely.
But if you look at what the spokesman of the Nigerian Air Force himself said, that's the Director of Public Relations and Information, Nigerian Air Force, Air Commodore Edward Gapquet. The statement he released, I want to read it verbatim, and he says around 12:45 p.m. a Nigerian Air Force Alpha aircraft returning from a successful air interdiction mission between the boundaries of Zamfara and Kaduna State came under intense enemy fire, which led to its crash in Zamfara State. That's the Air Force. So we take that statement as a statement of fact, released by the agency directly in control of what's happening, or what has happened.
I still find that statement not completely, that I find that statement slightly misleading. I'm saying that with if you check with the assets the Boko Haram and they do not have surface to air missile. That is the only capability that can reach an Alpha jet flying at the level it should fly. I'm saying that the so-called coming under intense fire is during dive bombing by the pilot or the aircraft, or because of the lack of laser guide or lack of the equipment, the pilot must have been flying low to try and confirm his target, whether it's a civilian or not. So the problem is, I'm trying to say that I think there's need for much more clarification.
Yes, that's a clarification I want to bring in now, because the statement.
The bandits
sorry, sir.
Have the capacity.
Yes. To shoot down now
military jet aircraft.
Now let's look at the statement again. The statement didn't say it was carrying out a surveillance operation when it happened, that it was flying low when it happened, because it was getting close, trying to see clearer visibility on what was happening or who the targets were. It said that it was returning from a successful air interdiction mission, which to any ordinary man who understands basic English, it means it had concluded its mission and it was returning back. So one would presuppose that when returning back, you're not flying low. You're flying at the right altitude to get back to destination, which I would assume would be the proper altitude where an aircraft flies, a fighter jet flies. So for the Air Force to admit that even at this altitude on returning back after its successful mission, it was shut down. Do you not think at this point you should begin to, put question marks on you doubt you have about the capacity of Bandits to shoot down an aircraft?
I have to repeat over and over because I do not like the public being misled. I would request that you may need to redirect your question to the Air Force spokesman that the aircraft was shot when it was flying high up at the level an Alpha Jet flies. I beg to differ that it must have been during dive bombing or flying low to confirm his targets.
All right, just stay.
Having said this, I'm not underestimating the capacity of the bandits. In fact, I don't call them bandits. I would call them terrorists. I do not. But what I don't want to do is to rate them and then our Air Force is capable. What the flight lieutenant did was a feat because of the kind of aircraft he had, which with all is a 35 years over aircraft. He needed to fly low to achieve what he achieved. I do not believe that the bandits fired Alpha Jet flying at the altitude it should fly.
All right, I am still staying with you before I go back to Kabiru. I mean, I have heard what you have responded to some of the questions Uti has played out here. But you will also remember that sometime back in April, another Alpha Jet crashed in Borno State, one of where the areas where the Boko Haram has a stronghold. And there was this argument and also outright denial by the military that it was shot down by jihadists. And, still we haven't seen the full report of that case up to now. But then I think what we as Nigerians and a lot of people are trying to ask is that if at all, even though whatever altitude or axis the plane was flying, for the fact that the plane came down and the report that we have is that it was shot at by some bandits, so like you have clarified here, terrorists, isn't it a show of new dynamics of the bandits' attacks and their measure of attacks on the Nigerian military and those who are at the forefront of fighting this issue? What can be done regarding that?
I think the thing is, first of all, it's an issue of, first of all, fixed wings aircraft are not the best for fighting the kind of threat we have. I would have thought that with what has been happening and with the attempts all over so far, the Air Force is doing its best. But I would have thought that armed helicopters, gunships, acting or operating with drones and high technology, with special operation forces trained locals as first responders, is a better approach to go against rather than using fixed wings aircraft. But again, I know we soon going to put in service the Super Tucano. But having said that, even that is not the be and all, because I think we need to go much more for special operation forces approach to dealing with insurgents. Special operations forces approach is one which relies on gunships, airborne platforms like drones, that will give real-time intelligence, which, and using the locals who are trained to take on the fight to the insurgents or to the Fulani armed headers, or Boko Haram.
All right, let's bring in Kabiru here. Kabiru, I mean, let's interrogate further. I mean, the capacity of this group of persons that we generally call bandits to shoot down an aircraft. I'm looking at that statement again from the Nigerian Air Force, and it clearly said that the pilot who came under intense ground fire from the bandits. What kind of ground fire could possibly bring down a fighter jet?
Thank you, Utibe. What do we know that these bandits have, at least based on their own admission, based on the admission of the Ministry of Defense, as well as our own intelligence? I run a consultancy. I am out in the field. I gather my own sources. Unfortunately, some of them I can't say here in the public. Now, we're aware that they do have RPGs. We're aware they have platforms for launching this. We're aware they also have several small and light weapons. Now, what perhaps is very interesting and that I would like my co-discussant to perhaps also explore is the fact that they've come up with what I would consider as quite scary methods to shoot at these air assets that we have. An example, remember that they are domiciled in locations that have elevated, like mountains as an example. And then we also hear that they climb trees, sometimes hide in those trees, and take advantage of this platform to shoot at these flying assets. All of these are information that is available from the Nigerian Air Force. Now, the range that a normal RPG, for instance, would reach is a range that a fighter jet, for instance, will not fly normally at that low altitude. So I agree with Colonel Nyiam to that extent. But then, like he rightly said, sometimes these jets fly down for different purposes. And then when you now put into consideration that these guys are at an elevated range, when they are on a mountain or on a very high tree, and over time they've also used some, I don't know what the kind of knowledge or tactics they're able to acquire. They have an idea of how the pattern of these jets are able to move around. And I'm saying this based on the information I've received from our gallant troops that are out in the field. So they appear to have that capacity. How they have that capacity, unfortunately, it's not my remit to know. I mentioned earlier on that we have already an unsolved case in Borno State. Now we're having a second case in Zamfara State, and I think the onus is on the military to look into these unsolved cases, find out how they were able to do that, and more importantly, put in place measures to ensure that this is not repeated, subsequently in subsequent operations by the Nigerian Air Force.
But still staying with you, Kabiru, I know that a lot of Nigerians, perhaps for the sake of clarity, would want more detail, but of course we know that we're talking about security, and these are very sensitive conversations in detail. I do remember that in April this year, 2021, I think on Reuters, arguably so, some members of Boko Haram came out to say that they claimed the shooting down of the Nigerian Air Force fighter jets 475 at that time, which was also which was also one of the things that the military came out to refute. But then again, that also created palpable fear among citizens that the possibility of this could also be true. Going from that till now and looking at what has happened recently, what do you think should be the angle of communication between the Nigerian military and the people? Should it be one of clarity or one of sensitivity? Because whether you like it or not, people are going to take the details that they get in the media and run with it.
Yes, and I must commend the Nigerian military for its attempts to enhance its communication with the public. Almost all the units of the military do have communications departments, and they are headed by very senior military officers. Apart from that, there is a civil military coordinating unit in almost all the charters. If you go to the northeast, there is one. In the south, there is one in the north, and all the geopolitical zones you have these civil military coordinating units that meet severally with either the press or civilian components to explain what the military is doing. But I think there is need for more, for the simple reason that we're in an era where social media, unfortunately, actually carries out this thing, whether the military releases it or not. There are the components of the social media that would release those reports and add fake news to that, and attempts even to sometimes jeopardize the effort of the military. Then the importance of clarity and proactiveness cannot be overemphasized. One other major challenge that I would have to mention is the inability of the Nigerian military to either be clear with its communications policy or to enforce compliance with that communications policy. We are living witnesses to the fact that even as at today, GSM is the major platform of communication by the Nigerian military. And just 2 days ago, after the unfortunate incident in Zamfara, in Dansadao, when the gallant pilot returned, we saw how videos of him were taken at the landing port, and this was communicated via social media. Now, it's unfortunate that our military is having to rely on GSM. GSM is not a secure platform for communication. In fact, it shouldn't be even for civil departments, what more of the military. So I think that needs to be checked. And then, of course, the other side of it is the proactiveness with which this communications department by the various military units will release information to the public, so that it not only counters the fake news, but also the social media accounts that will be given in that report. First off, you cannot clamp down on such reports. They will come out to the public. So the best way to do it is to be proactive, so that whenever these fake news come out, already you have reliable platforms that you can hold on to. At the final factor that I'll mention, the trust deficit between the military and the majority of Nigerians is huge. And so one of the best ways to counter that trust deficit is transparency and proactiveness with the release of information. I mentioned in my opening remarks that we have a number of unsolved cases. Airforce assets have been downed or they've fallen, and reports regarding how those assets were either downed or fell are yet to be released. A lot of questions have arisen. You mentioned the incident in April. Until date, I'm not aware that those pilots have either been recovered, their corpses, or even the assets itself has been recovered. So those are questions that unfortunately add to that trust deficit that I mentioned, and that makes it mandatory for the Nigerian military to be more transparent and forthcoming in sharing information with the public.
I do see that. I mean, you talked about something very pertinent. You mentioned the use of GSM as the primary engagement, for communication for the military. And then, when you look at comparison review between other countries, I mean, not, very far from us here, countries like Kenya, we've seen them have, some sort of interaction, in the past years, countries like Ethiopia, countries like Ghana, and some others. And you would also want to wonder, looking at the generics of information gathering and intelligence, do you think Nigeria is doing enough, especially with the military, in looking at intelligence gathering?
Unfortunately, no, and that is my field actually, and I can tell you that we can do better than what we are doing currently in terms of both intelligence gathering as well as the analysis of that that intelligence and the sharing. Intelligence is a cycle. From the point of view where you determine what to collect, from collecting it to analyzing it and then to disseminating it. Let me give you a very small example. 100 plus of our kids have been abducted in Buni Yauri. If I was to gather intelligence on that particular activity, one of what I'll be looking is their feeding, their clothing. If there are women among them, they will have their monthly cycle. Someone somewhere would probably be interested in buying cotton wool. So, I mean, the ordinary average person would not be thinking of all of these things. But when you put out both technical and human intelligence out there to collect this little information that looks, really ordinary, but at the end of the day would create a picture. Not too long ago, someone was arrested who was a supplier of bread to the bandits. Sure. And that too can be an intelligence. These kids will have to be fed. If you put out this both human and technical intelligence or information gathering capabilities, for these little things, eventually a picture would have to emerge. Unfortunately, I do not think we're doing enough of that. I think we can do better. And in today's world, there are a lot of technical gadgets that are available for the collection of this type of information, and I think we need to invest in that. Colonel Nyiam mentioned drones. That's one surveillance asset that we can also use. Once we have eyes in the sky, it helps increase our capability for surveillance. Then of course the other one is on the ground. And in the past, you would have even people in markets, feigning to be, lunatics that would just be keeping an eye on someone who comes to buy 100 bread, or someone who comes to buy pads, or even hijab in their numbers. Little things like that, and before you know it, a picture will emerge. And that's intelligence. Intelligence is not something big that you go and pluck from heaven. It's right there in front of you. How you collect it, what meaning you make out of it is really what matters.
All right. Kabiru, before I move to Colonel Nyiam, he talked about, at this point, we shouldn't be calling them bandits anymore. These guys have graduated to a level where they should be tagged as terrorists. What are your thoughts on that?
First off, I disagree with Colonel Nyiam for the simple reason that I'm guided by the provisions of the Terrorism Prevention Act 2011 as amended in 2013. Unfortunately, that act does not even define terrorism. However, it gave in section, if you give me a moment, it gave what can be considered as terrorist act in section 1 subsection 3, and I'll quickly read this just to give us some clarity in our discussion. Unfortunately, I can't bring it up, but before the end of our conversation, hopefully I'll be able to bring it up. Now, if we are guided by laws in our country as Nigerians, then we can't go outside the provisions of the law. If the only law that we have on terrorism, that is the TPA, Terrorism Prevention Act, does not even define terrorism, rather it provides acts that can be considered terrorist. What the onus is on one of us to now go to court, and because again, that's what the TPA does. It does not give the president, it does not give the parliament, it does not give even the military the power to designate anyone a terrorist. I was one of the few persons, a couple of, I think last year or 2 years ago, the military designated one group in Nasarawa as terrorist. I raised objection citing the TPA that the military does not have that power, and later we were proven right. The military had to recant that designation. So we must be guided by the existing laws, and the TPA currently says that only the judiciary, and in this instance the Attorney General of the Federation, can have that capacity. So someone somewhere needs to take this matter up in court and let the court now determine whether the bandits are terrorists or not. It is not Colonel Nyiam.
But on the basis of the
TPA makes it clear.
Yes, on the basis of the activities, Kabiru, on the basis of what they've been able to do so far, which of course is encapsulated in the Terrorism Prevention Act 2013, which you referred to, would it also qualify as acts of terror and the group as a terror group?
So there are a couple of factors that would have to be determined. I honestly wanted to read the subsection 1, subsection 3 of the TPA. One of them is the intention, the motivation. What is their intention? Then who are the actors? And then more importantly, what do they intend to achieve by that act? So those are the three things that would determine whether that is a terrorist act or not. And like I said, it is left for the judiciary to determine whether that is a terrorist act or not. Unfortunately, no one has yet has taken the matter to a competent court of jurisdiction to determine whether that action is terrorist or not. If you give me a moment, I'll quickly read.
While you're going through this, through that, let me quickly read what I have here in the act, and it says that an act of terrorism means an act which is deliberately done with malice, aforethought, and which may seriously harm or damage a country or an international organization. I think going further down, he talks about an attack on a person's life which may cause serious bodily harm or death. It also includes kidnapping of a person.
Exactly. So that is subsection 1, subsection 3 of the TPA.
Does this reflect what these guys do?
Yes. If we rely on the pedestrian definition, yes, the act is terrorism. But again, what I want to emphasize is that the TPA says only the judiciary has the right to designate any group as terrorist or not. And I think we need to be very mindful of that. If we allow that right to any other person outside of the judiciary, it means one day the military can wake up and, as an example, determine that myself or you or anyone is a terrorist, and you can understand how the danger of that, especially where we have.
I get your point. I get your point, Kabiru. My question to you.
Motivation sometimes for this designation.
My question to you.
Even if the act in this instance, I agree, is clearly an act that could, indicate a terrorist motive, it would be wrong for anyone outside the judiciary to designate that group.
Yeah,
again, I want to emphasize the important thing is for us to go to court, any one of us, and ask that the court should designate that group terrorist.
Yes, which is the responsibility of the Attorney General of the Federation. Do you think at this point the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, going by what we have heard and seen, and even the admittance by the Nigerian Air Force of what these guys have been able to do so far, plus the activities we've seen across the Northwest, do you think at this point the government, through its officials, should approach the court to get them that proper designation in line with what the statutes says?
Yes, I think given, I said I run a consultancy, and I can tell you that based on the figures at my disposal, between January and June, these groups have killed at least 5,000 Nigerians. And if we're in a sane society, any act that has resulted in the death of up to 5,000 of our citizens should be interrogated. And if the interrogation means designating them terrorists, then so be it. I have no objection in any way from asking or prompting the Attorney General of the Federation to seek that designation in a competent court of law. The danger, however, in that is the complexity related to that issue. There are three actors involved: actors that are criminal, actors that perhaps may be terrorist, and then actors that are in the realm of socio-economic activity. When you have farmer-herder violence and both groups are armed and they are killing each other, designating one or both of them terrorists would defeat the purpose for which you want to solve that. When you have a group, for instance, that are holding RPGs and are shooting down our aircraft, then perhaps if you're able to distinguish or determine that group and you name them what they are terrorists, that's okay. So again, I think it's a bit complex. It won't be as easy as sitting here and talking about it. We need to, one of the challenges, and we must admit this, is our inability, both from the side of the media and some of our analysts, to disaggregate these issues and call it what it is. Over time, we have seen ethnic profiling, we have seen stigmatization, and sometimes even a conscious and deliberate attempt to muggle up the issue and introduce elements that unfortunately are alien to it. Some of the intervention too, like the person of Sheikh Gumi, has not helped matters. And so I think before then, it's important to disaggregate the issue, disaggregate the groups, determine the groups that are holding this kind of weapons. If you generalize it, then you would create more problems. Once you disaggregate the groups and you know which group is holding these weapons, then you can term them either terrorist or whatever name you want to term them. I think the easiest sort of nomenclature that has been used is bandits, but we know that among those bandits there are groups that are actually not bandits. I can bring in and introduce the element of their linkage with terrorist groups that are in the northeast. we have listened to audio message, we have listened to sometimes video releases where they themselves have admitted that they have linkages with terrorist groups in the Northeast. So first off, we need to disaggregate these groups, determine them, and then before that nomenclature of terrorism is applied to groups that are carrying out actions that are terrorist.
Okay, thank you, Kabiru. Let me go to Colonel Nyiam. I mean, Colonel, you've heard what he has said. Someone will be asking, is it as complex as it is? Because you're also looking at what some of the consideration of the Terrorism Act, and it says, one, seriously intimidate a population. It also says seriously destabilize or destroy the fundamental political, constitutional, economic, or social structures of a country or an international organization. And it says by influence, coerces a system through intimidation to pay ransom. So you look at all of those statements and look at the considerations for what terrorism is. I mean, someone would say it is as clear as daylight. Look at the issue of IPOP, look at the issue of shites. We've seen certain prescriptions in the past. Is it not yet time to look at this as it is a case of terrorism and the need to prescribe it as it is?
I think I was listening to my colleague. He was in many ways, I would say, speaking from the two sides of the mouth, in that in your colleague, the interviewer, read out the act. First of all, the act can be in a self-serving way be interpreted, because if IPOP can be declared a terrorist group, why would these bandits who have killed more people in the Northwest and the North Central Niger states than IPOP, why the double standard? You see, it's not enough to be throwing the judiciary, throwing the law, especially in a system where even the law courts themselves are at times questionable. In a structure where even the law-making body, National Assembly itself, is itself hijacked and is coming out with laws that are questionable. There is no doubt in my mind that the bandits qualify to be called terrorists, especially if you call IPOP terrorists. All the arguments here or there do not wash. The issue we have, more so, when a number of these bandits are foreign, are from Niger, a number of these bandits, if you go back, they were people who were brought in for a political campaign and were neglected after the election, and they decided to go that way. So if you cannot declare most of the bandits are foreigners coming into our country, most of them coming to Niger State are foreigners, if you can't declare them terrorists, you can then declare a self-determination group terrorists. This is double standard. So no matter what my colleague, who I agree consults, and I would have thought his consultation would have led to advising the president to know that you cannot be applying double standards.
Colonel Nyiam, just before you go, in the presidential statement on his Eid el-Kabir speech, and I will quote him verbatim, he said, "We have started taking delivery of fighter aircraft and other necessary military equipment and hardware to improve the capacity of our security forces to confront terrorism." Now, how can you confront terrorism if you do not prescribe terrorism? How do you know what you're confronting if there is no ideology, terminology around it? So isn't the president himself, lacking in political will to come out straight up to tell Nigerians that this is what we are dealing with, rather than the cover quote commentaries that we're seeing from the presidency?
I agree with you. The whole problem is the whole problem is that the whole coloration is the issue of double standard by President Muhammad Buhari. If you watch from the beginning of July, when he gave his order, which is exercising his political will, the Air Force has intensified its operations in the Northwest. But the Northwest, there are killings in the North Central, Niger, which are 3 times what is happening in some Northwest states. There are killings going on in Benue, where the Air Force has not been ordered to take on the AK-47 armed militias. It is these double standards that worries people. Secondly, you also have a government which is coming up with what I would call decisions of controlling the message. For example, we get the impression that they want to be in a position to define what is the truth, and we are now hearing a position where somebody, after usurping the power to define what is the law, is now also saying that you should accept his definition of what the law is. I completely disagree. That the problem we have is that there is a need for much more sincerity of purpose from President Muhammad Buhari. That is lacking. And underlying all this, the cause of all these crises, national insecurity, the root cause is the refusal for President Muhammad Buhari to deal with the issue of the national question. You cannot expect a people, for example, what the Southwest is experiencing and what the South is experiencing, and the reaction of the federal government against the Southwest or Southeast being different from the reaction in the Northwest region. All this is making things muddy. And the issue about ethnic profiling, once a crime is committed, in amongst determining and defining the crime, you have to include the person and the person where it comes from. This is why in the UK or in the US or anywhere else, they would define a criminal if it's white, a white, if it is black, it's black. So I do not understand why people feel when you find a people being attacked by armed AK-47 Fulani militia in the Southwest, that you should not say they are armed Fulani, you should say they are armed
Colonel Nyiam, I actually want to quickly react to.
I don't know if you want me to educate
Kabiru, I'll come to you in a moment.
Issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
No, I don't want us to. I do not want us to, divert the conversation to that angle. Let's stay with the issue of the bandits and how best to deal with them. Colonel Nyiam, Kabiru said earlier that one of the reasons why it might be complex to designate these bandits as terrorists is because of the need to disaggregate them, because according to him, they are the RPG-wielding bandits who shoot down aircraft, and they are the commercial criminal bandits who abduct for ransom, and they are the moderate ones. If I can present his thoughts clearly like that. And so that if you declare them terrorists and you're putting an umbrella over all of them, is he right? Is there a sense in his argument?
No. First of all, if you have a non-state armed actor equipped with RPGs, you cannot but define him as a terrorist, especially when the acts he has committed, the acts are terrorist kind of acts. And by the way, on the issue of trying to educate Colonel Nyiam on diversity, I will beg that my colleague listens to Colonel Dangiwa Omar his statement is there and is wide that the mismanagement of diversity is actually that the president Muhammad Buhari is one responsible for the mismanagement of our diversity. It's not to educate Colonel Nyiam. It is to educate President Muhammad Buhari, if you have the confidence to that, because Colonel Umar has done so.
All right. Kabiru, your response, please.
Now,
let's try to stick with the issues and leave personal
confidence in the government. He has no confidence in the parliament and no confidence in our legal system. So the question is what he wants people to believe in. Who does he represent? We're in a representative democracy, and the parliament was elected. Now let's remember that this TPA that we're discussing was first, it was a bill from the parliament. It went through the processes of the creation of a law, and then before it eventually became a law. And if at any point in time, perhaps during the public hearing, there were aspects of that law that someone was uncomfortable with, then those could be questioned. Now, I don't want to speak personally. I have my reservations regarding some of the developments in our polity, but I'm here to discuss an issue that has important ramifications on our national development and on our national security. If I sit like Colonel Nyiam and make postulations that are not justifiable, as an example, when he says some of these bandits are foreigners, I would love him to substantiate his statements. When he says, for instance, that some of these bandits are not in possession of surface-to-air missiles, I would like him to substantiate that. I can, based on my background and what I do, every statement I make are statements that I should, to a certain extent, have facts to support them. I came here to discuss the TPA. Now, whether I agree with the TPA or not, at the moment, the TPA is what defines what a terrorist act is. Whether I agree with it or not, it is the law that we have to do with. I cannot go to the US, I can't go to Australia or to Britain to bring a law and introduce it to Nigeria. Of course, if I was a citizen of that country and living in that country, that's a different thing. But at the moment, I'm a Nigerian. Irrespective of what I feel, whether I agree with those laws or not, there are laws that guide us, and I would encourage us to remember that in our conversations.
All right, we will definitely come back to the conversation and see, but in the meantime, we'll take a short break and we will come right back.